Welcome to Photo Op, the photo opinion podcast. I'm Ben Lucas.
And I'm Stuart Marlantis.
And this is the podcast where we talk about all things photo and video. So today we are talking about part 2 about finding your style and creative voice. But first, a listener question. So this week's question, is product photography still viable in the age of 3D rendering?
Yes, definitely. And you know why? Because reality is so much more detailed than a 3D render.
Absolutely. Although I will say, like, vast majority of IKEA catalogs get 3D rendered and you can't tell the difference. So is it? Is it really?
Yes. At least in the way that I'm picturing it.
Show your work.
At least in the way that I'm picturing it. So, sure, like a product on white, if you've got a talented enough 3D modeler who can make something that's like super amazing and has great textures and everything, okay, fine. You can approach reality. But in my opinion, in the product photography that I like is something's going on. It's in an environment. Yes, it's being used. It's with other objects that relate to it. And that is something that's so hard to 3D model in a way that's convincing. Like if you have I don't know, this is going to be a really boring example, but let's say you have a shovel and it's in the dirt. Like, how do you model all the dirt and grass and the shovel in it that's going to look exactly perfect? You get that kind of uncanny valley effect, but for objects and not people. And I feel like that is very difficult to replicate really well in 3D modeling. Granted, Unreal Engine 5 just came out, so a bunch of people are going to jump on the comments and say, well, Unreal Engine 5 is really cool, and I just did the Matrix demo city and everything looked fantastic. Okay, maybe it's probably getting better. Grime is getting better, but that kind of hyper detail, super realistic environments that something is in, that's very hard to do. Reasonably.
Yeah, there are two things that I'll say to that. One is I worked at a studio with a photographer who is an absolute master at still life and products. I learned so much from him. David, you're fantastic. You are not listening to this podcast, but you taught me so much when I was working under you. So he was telling me about back in the days before Photoshop, before digital, he did this ad campaign where they needed to melt a toaster. And they were thinking, like, how do we get it to look right? And if something is so hot, the toaster just like literally is melting kind of in a Dali-esque style. So he stuck a toaster in the oven and melted it and took a photo. Boom.
Cool.
Real. So no, that's just kind of a weird, quirky example. I have no idea what that ad campaign was for, but there is still something about when you are trying to sell a product, saying here is a perfect, beautiful rendition of what it should look like any pretty much advertisement you've seen on TV of a phone. 9 times out of 10, it's probably a CGI versus a photo. But when you are looking at the actual thing, you want it to look real. You want it to feel authentic. You want to show that it has some flaws, whether that is a little scratch or grime or something. You want it to look pristine, of course, but you want people... It's that 4.9 star effect. If someone has 5 stars, you go, no. They're all fake. But if someone has 4.9 stars, you go, oh, they're very, very good.
Yeah. A product in a void is hard to believe almost. Like, it's hard to picture yourself owning it or using it. Like, you obviously want your audience, the people you're selling to think, I want one of those. I can see myself using that. I can see myself enjoying that. And if it's in a white or black void, and it's perfectly rendered, that's hard to relate to.
Absolutely. So thank you for the question. Hopefully we kind of covered that. Yes, I think there is absolutely still a place for product photography.
Also, it can be so much simpler. Like, you take a picture. I mean, I'm not saying that product photography is easy, but 3D modeling at high detail is a very, very difficult. And you would be surprised. I think a lot of people kind of assume Hollywood nowadays is like all 3D all the time. Actually, practical effects can often be cheaper and easier to do than paying 300 CG artists to work for 2 years on it.
Yeah,
So,
like
yeah.
when I was watching Tenet and they crash a plane,
Mm-hmm.
they actually crashed a plane because you know what was cheaper than paying 200 CG artists
Exactly.
a year's salary?
Exactly.
An empty shell of a plane. Like,
So hire a product photographer today, not a CG artist. No disrespect, CG artists. You do great stuff too.
but yeah, by the way, I do product photography, so shout out to me. This episode brought to you by me. Okay. And on with the main episode. So this is part 2. Last time, if you didn't see it, you might want to go check that out. Do you need a style?
No,
Our answer
yeah.
was no, yeah, yeah, no, yeah, no, yeah,
This episode assumes no, yeah.
no, yeah.
I think.
So this week we are going to talk about actually finding your creative voice. If you
Yes.
don't know what your style is, how do you develop and cultivate that into something that you feel like is your own?
Who do you like? That's where you should start.
Me. You like me better. Yeah, leave a comment. Who do you like better? This is a straight head-to-head
I didn't mean between two.
straight head-to-head contest, Stuart.
I meant with photographers, not with us.
Oh.
Well, I mean, he's a photographer. I don't really consider myself one. So. Between the two of us, I would hope that you like his work better. My goodness.
when it comes to photography.
Yes.
Yeah.
My goodness, definitely. But for real, are there any photographers that you enjoy? Is there a group kind of that you feel yourself attracted to? Are there photographers whose work you like and you potentially want to replicate in some way? I think that's the first way to get started.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So when I first got started, I did not pick up a camera and go, I'm a portrait photographer. I will now do weddings and families. Like, weddings and families are the easiest way to make money, I feel. Give or take, because literally anyone can pick up a camera and go, hey, do you want to pay me $50 and I'll do your Christmas card? And then, like, it won't be good, but some people don't know the difference or say whatever,
Unfortunately.
it was $50. So, that's a thing that happens.
Yeah.
It's very low barrier to entry versus can you shoot laser beam technical, like, scientific photography. That's a very high barrier to entry. There's a lot of skill and equipment required to do that. So less people do it. So if you are the type of person who does that, they're just like, the higher barrier to entry means that, like, you already are more niche and people are inclined to come to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But when you're first getting started and you have no idea what you're doing, just like you said earlier, of like copying other people, I just looked up at other photographers and I found some that I like. My particular inspirations, Ben Vong Wong, shout out, who actually helped me.
Amazing work.
Amazing work. I've met him several times in person. He has actually helped me personally with my triple click booth.
Talk about practical effects. Dude.
Yeah. But when he started, it was all this kind of hyper surreal photo composite stuff. And he still does that same look, but now it's all practical.
Yeah,
and,
it's amazing.
And so I love kind of the evolution of where his style is. And it's funny because Dave Hill also did that hyper realistic many photo composite thing that I very much enjoyed. And he's definitely pared down to now he just shoots like slide film and like medium format film and stuff. Like he's going back to like black and white, which is not my thing, but I really loved his early work. Joe McNally, huge fan. Met him in person. I was just fangirling the whole time.
But yeah, start with that. I mean, imitate people that you like. It's okay especially when you're starting out. Like,
absolutely, you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah, you don't know what you're doing, and you learn a lot by copying somebody else's work. Probably don't continue to copy that in professional work.
Yeah, don't make that your career. But when you're learning and trying to figure stuff out, of like, there are some photographers that I kind of worked under and tried to copy their style, and like my work looked nothing like their work. Or I tried to do what they do and I go like, this isn't fun. This isn't interesting. Also, I'm looking at the end result. It's not good. So there are going to be those things of like, I was shooting, there's this very particular style of photography right now for pets and dogs. like dog breath photography is the best at it. Can I do that? Yes, I can. But I also realize I am not as good at wrangling pets as she is. Do my photos look like hers? No, not at all. Do all of my is my lighting the same? Is my camera the same? Is everything the same? Yeah. Does it look the same? No. That's kind of what we're talking about when we say style. I can do everything, set up the lights for you, hand you the camera, and you're still going to view it in your mind differently. You're still going to frame it differently. It's going to look different.
Definitely. So yeah, start by copying.
Absolutely start by copying. The next thing I would say is when you start by copying, you're not going to copy it well. and this is the DNA replication of like, oh no, there's an error, and now the replication is replicating the error. Essentially, that's kind of what you want, because in deviating from those things, now you are creating something that is unique in your own style.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's certain stuff where you look at it after you've made it, and you're like, ooh. So most of this is garbage, but I like this 1% that actually worked out pretty well. Like, I want to keep that, and let's throw the rest of this away. And that you keep taking those 1% over and over and over, and eventually make something out of it. I feel like over time.
Absolutely.
But that's the next thing, I think, is spend time shooting and making stuff. And as you're doing, you just need that time, unfortunately. I mean, there's the common saying of like, your first, you need 10,000 hours, or your first 10,000 photos are going to be your worst. And that same sort of thing is just getting at the point of, it takes a lot of time to develop skills and to develop a style, and keep copying, keep trying things, keep failing. You're only going to develop a good style by failing and trying things over and over and over until you hone in on it. So I think the next thing is like, don't worry, take some time.
Yeah, absolutely. You are never going to find your style by listening to this podcast and sitting on your couch.
No.
This podcast,
if only.
This podcast might help, but you're only ever going to find your style by actually going out and doing it, and doing the repetition, and kind of, like we said, in replicating that DNA over and over and over. The mistakes and the deviations from the people you're trying to copy, once those start getting kind of replicated over and over and are different from the original, of like, all of a sudden you found your style. We kind of bashed, was it earlier this episode or last week, on the boho chic, overly bright wedding photographer. But like, do you shoot that? Yeah. Can those photos look amazing and beautiful? Yeah. Are people going to hire you and pay you a lot of money? Yeah. But at that point, it is kind of less about your style in kind of how your photos look, and maybe your style is more about the way that you capture intimacy of a couple, or the way that your posing looks and feels, kind of gives a photo life and movement, where in otherwise amateur photographer copying that style would just be like, oh, this is just a very boring photo. Even though the preset could be the same, the camera settings could be the same. Your style doesn't necessarily have to be a deviation of kind of like the color palette. It needs to be something that gives it life and interest.
Yeah, your style needs to reinforce your skills. As your skills get better, your photos will get technically better, but the style is what helps you then differentiate that technical ability from other people.
Yeah, like 10 years ago, my selling point at wedding shows was, I do this one particular thing with a flash. No one else does that. Well, guess what? Now everyone else can do that. It's very easy. You can learn it online. I have tutorials on it. Like, it is super easy to do. I can't differentiate on, I am more technically skilled. No one cares. You have to differentiate on kind of some of the intangibles. So part of it is style, but part of it with creative voice of like, what are you trying to say with your photos?
What story are you trying to tell?
And I think that's something where you and I actually have very, you started off by saying that you do not have a style and you don't have a voice, but I think you actually do, because you and I have very different kind of ways of like how we approach something. So when you're doing photos, of your photos are trying to tell more of a story.
Well, yeah, and I think a consequence of that is just from working in video is like you have to tell a story in video always. And I think you have to, for good photos, you're telling a story too. So I don't want to disparage photographers and be like, "Oh, I'm better because I worked in video." Not at all. But that is a significant portion of what I'm thinking about when I'm shooting photos or video or anything really creative is like, there's a story here. What's the story? And generally I try to tell it as honestly as I can. I try not to color it too much from an outsider's perspective, so to speak, which is how I generally refer to myself as a documentarian more than I do as an artist. Because I try to show the real world, so to speak, and show what's actually happening in whatever I'm documenting, and hopefully have some sort of narrative as part of that I can tell.
And I think that is an incredibly strong like creative voice to have, because when you go out onto a shoot, there are so many things that you can do or people say that you should do that you either do or don't do because it reinforces that like documentary voice that you're trying to bring to your images.
Yeah, it can make some decisions actually relatively easy because you're like, is this reality or is this bending reality too much? And I try to stay on the side of, be honest with the viewer. And yeah, sometimes that makes for things that I don't think look as good as what I would refer to as real artists, of which I don't consider myself.
Well, and like so it's funny because sometimes I do things that are really weird and strange and avant-garde and out there. But hey, do you guys want to know a fun fact about me? Shh, don't tell anyone. I did not actually get into the photography program at the college I went to. I graduated in interdisciplinary visual art. I have an art degree, but not technically a photography degree, because they're like, no. Your stuff is not weird and avant-garde enough, and you don't tell a story, and your artist statement is lacking. Versus, I just wanted to make stuff that looks really cool. So previous to that, I studied graphic design. So I am thinking about what are the graphical elements? How does your eye movement flow through this? How does this interact with any text that it might be accompanying? How does this lay out on a page when you have a magazine? How does this make the reader feel of like, I'm lighting this bodybuilder in this really cool kind of Armstrong pose with the backlight, and it's just almost something ascendant about it. But other than I made them look really awesome and you get feelings looking at it.
Power.
I don't really have like, here's my deep artist statement about how this intertwines society and art. And no, I don't really do that. So there is something that you can do with your creative voice. And my creative voice is like, I do not care about any of that artsy fartsy stuff, but I am not above changing reality if that makes it look the way that it looks up here in my head, even if that's not real.
Like I said, real artist. Not real artists.
The real artists are over. No, I want to get paid. I don't want to be
No, I'm referring to you. Like, but see, that's the thing is like you have a vision in your head about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. You have in what I would call an artistic vision, even though you just said that that they're separate. You have an actual artistic vision you're trying to execute on.
Right.
I do not have a vision in my head generally of what I'm shooting.
Do the thing and
I
what
do the
comes
thing
will come,
and what comes will come. Like, I'm very wishy-washy, and I just like whatever I can make at the end of this is what it is, and it's very, I feel like almost organic, but not necessarily as positively as that may sound. Like, it's what it is, and if something it didn't turn out well, that's what it is, and you deal with that. And if it turned out well, great. And that's why a lot of the photography and videography that I do tends to try to push the technical limits. Is, in my opinion, the best way for me to shoot good stuff is to get in front of increasingly difficult and interesting things that nobody else can shoot. And so like I shoot a lot underwater, and I was very early on in drones before those blew up and became really easy to use. Like, I've always been trying to push the technical limits of things and try to incorporate all sorts of technology and stuff to get shots that you can't get any other way. Because in my opinion, I have no real artistic vision, and so I try to differentiate by making something that's either too difficult or too technically complicated for anybody else to bother with. Whereas you have an actual vision that you execute on, which I hugely respect.
But the other thing too is when it comes to, okay, who is it that we want to hire, and without looking at your portfolio, if your creative voice, so to speak, is I work on projects that push the limitations of what is possible and technology and do that in a real and grounded way, someone can hear that statement and say, this is exactly the type of person we're looking for this job. Versus without looking at my portfolio, I can say, I want to get kind of epic, dramatic, show-stopping images that make people stop and go, wow. And that is kind of another thing where if someone is looking for kind of a more documentary editing feel, it's like, no, that's not quite right. But other people can hear that and be like,
that's exactly what I want.
I want to see what that looks like to you. Because if I agree that that's what it looks like to me, then yes, this is the thing I want. So this is kind of more of what we mean about your creative voice. It doesn't necessarily have to be, the particular style or color palette or preset that you use, but it is more about like kind of what are you trying to say with your photos, but all of this, your style, how you interact with people, how you interact with your subjects, how you light, pose, style, all of that evolves as you grow and get better, and all of those kind of one cell error duplications that you have tried to copy someone and now it ended up your own thing. Well, now you have a creative voice. Like that's your voice. If you end up, you might try and copy a lot of different things and you'll do it once or twice and go, this isn't really it. But if there's one that you find yourself coming back to and do it over and over and over again, I think you've done it. I think you've found your voice and your style.
You did it.
You did
Congratulations.
it. Yay.
So it turns out I do have a style after all.
You do have a style after all.
Who'da thunk?
Who'da thunk? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation today. There will be a link down in the description if you missed part 1 and want to hear us jabber on about that.
And you do.
So thank you guys so much for listening. We are going to follow up with kind of some business tips next time, so stay tuned for that. If you find this interesting / educational, be sure to go to our Patreon, patreon.com/nomcreative, as in nom nom nom. We've got a $1 tip jar. Thank you so much for our patrons that we have there, and we'll see you next time.
Join us next time for serious business.
If you have questions or ideas for future episodes, you can email us at hello@photo-op.show.
Watch us on Ben's YouTube channel at NomCreative,
as in om nom nom.
Share this with a friend, and you can listen to Photo Op anywhere podcasts are sold.
Or download it, because it's free.